Hi everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about pricing a service, one of the challenging aspects of service marketing. In order to price a service, we need to first determine its value to the consumer. Creating the value or working on the value, remember services are co-created, requires an understanding of the type of costs associated with providing a service together with knowing the impact that consumer demand has on costs. So as the consumer wants more of a service, for example, airline travel or hotel, restaurants, costs do go up. As with pricing decisions, the first objective must also be determined whether we want to increase sales or market share or perhaps work in terms of yield or profitability. So firstly, we need to understand the types of costs associated with providing various types of services. The first, and probably not so obvious, is the time costs. So remember that services are perishable, that services are created and consumed at the same time. So the time in providing a service, for example, labour costs, can also take the other time. And also we've got consumables such as the seat we have on the aircraft or the hotel room, and the time that's available for people to consume that service. Different service encounters also make cost standardisation difficult. So the medical profession with Medicare in Australia has this issue that costs, of course, can vary according to the type of inquiries that you might make of your doctor. Also, a similar example might be in legal and accounting services. There are also social costs. For some services, a more personal delivery may provide a higher perceived value, but this, of course, is a higher social cost. And a more personalised service may also lower the cost to the consumer. So, for example, if we wanted, we could provide services to more than 2 consumers at a time in health, but of course there'd be a social cost in that as well, in the lack of personal service. Financial costs, of course, are the costs involved in any service transaction which we need to think about, both costs of the core service, the tangible aspects that we need to provide the services, the processes, and supplementary and augmented services. There are also psychological costs related to cognitive dissonance, which is the difference between what they expect and what they experience. Psychological costs have to do with more than money. And here's an example here with Virgin Blue's performance figures, which is really the number of times that they're on time. And of course, that has to do with a major psychological cost of catching an aircraft, using airline services. Then we have specific objectives, and of course we've got fluctual seasonal demand, which may force organisations such as telecommunication providers to charge different rates during different periods. We see this in electrical pricing as well, where we have a national grid. We see this sometimes with Uber and their surge pricing. Another objective may also be to reward loyal customers, to provide them discounts or free flights. Competitors will also influence the way we do business in services. Some service organisations will price near a competitor to signal that that's a similar service, while others may price a service to differentiate themselves as a low-cost economy provider, for example Tiger Airways, or as a more high-quality business class provider, Qantas. Demand considerations also need to be taken into account, and really what we're talking about here is that you can collect information about demand for services, whether it is responsive to price in the short term, we call that elastic demand, or relatively inelastic, where it's less responsive. In other words, demand falls less than the proportion in price increase. At times such as a peak season, the service can also fluctuate between periods of elastic and inelastic demand. Cost considerations also must be considered when pricing services by the provider. We may have a loss leader strategy. Many legal firms have the first consultation free idea, or software providers provide demo versions of their services. So this might encourage consumers to come into a business to consider services, or perhaps we may be using cost considerations to increase market share to gain greater efficiencies. This slide here just shows you some idea of pricing, and this is an example of elastic demand where the price increase or decrease, the quantity decreases or increases, in this case decreases, we've got a price drop at a much higher level. Relatively inelastic demand here, perhaps we might say booking in at the Hilton Hotel in Paris during Bastille Day, or the Ritz Hotel, that price is relatively unresponsive to demand, and our prices can change and move from one aspect to another. There are also customer considerations which we should take into account. The more complex the service, the more things we've required: financial planning, complex operations, complex higher degree supervision, higher the cost. And also, if consumers have higher knowledge, so for example, if a consumer has higher knowledge and does a lot more preparation of financial matters, the cost of the service can be reduced. There are also profit considerations. So for example, in introducing new services, we may run at a slight loss, peak pricing, and then try and gain demand over the life cycle of the service. We may have issues of peak pricing where we price higher when we know that, for example, airline travel and tourist destinations during school holiday periods. Niche provider pricing, where we can't price low because of volume, we may provide specialist services and charge a much higher price. There are service product considerations as well, and prices, of course, should be sufficient to cover any possible increase, such as notable increases in labour costs. And this is, of course, a challenge for many organisations because very many services are labour intensive. There are also legal considerations. So some services, such as phone contracts, or you might leases of services that you might consume, legally bind the consumer and the firm to a contractual price that cannot be changed during the duration of the agreement. Some other types of demand pricing which also need to be considered. These are generally short term. So you may see changes in pricing because of seasonal demand. The idea here is that you drop prices in periods of low demand to encourage more people to use your service. At peak demand, where demand is greater than supply, you clearly would increase prices. You can have situational demand where you have an unexpected demand for a service. Uber does this with its surge pricing. Other examples might be an example with a hotel chain finding popularity with an event at a short period of time, and so on. Some customers, in terms of customer type demand, may be priced differently. They may be given additional benefits or values. We see this with business travellers. Business customers of many banks have their own account managers to help them with transactions. That's it for today. Pretty short, but there's quite a lot for you to consider in pricing. Thanks for your time.